If you would recall, in the last learning objective, we talked about, we defined cell signaling and we talked about the four main processes involved in communication between cells. We started by talking about signal transmission. We said that cells synthesize different types of signaling molecules. In this objective, we actually explore three types of signaling molecules. In addition to that, we also explore how cells deliver these signaling molecules to the target cell. So to start, the released chemical signals can move to local or distant target cells. Cells can also make temporary cell-to-cell contact in order to release those signals. Cells can also communicate directly through cell junctions. And finally, cells can communicate via electrical or energy signals. So what are some of the different types of signals that are synthesized? Your immune cells will synthesize interleukins. Your neurons will synthesize neurotransmitters. There are specialized cells throughout the body that are going to synthesize growth factors. And your endocrine glands, these are going to produce the hormones. Your endocrine glands are specialized cells that don't have any ducts, and they secrete hormones into the surrounding fluid, and these travel to target cells that are in the bloodstream. On the right, you have animations that kind of depict how these signals are getting to the target cell. So in this case, some cells are going to secrete signaling molecules and they're going to travel to nearby cells. And some on the bottom, in this animation, we have specialized cells known as neurons that are located in the nervous system. These are going to respond to an electrical signal, and these are going to cause vesicles within this cell that are filled with neurons to merge with the plasma membrane and release their chemical signals. So the chemical signals released by the neuron is the neurotransmitter, and these will bind to receptors on the target neuron or target cell. So as I mentioned earlier, we have to get these different signaling molecules from one destination to the next. Sometimes the cells are nearby and sometimes these cells are farther away. So the chemical transmission to nearby target cells, we call these signals local regulators, okay? So these types of chemicals are transmitted locally. There are two types of local signals. So sometimes these local signals or these signaling molecules will travel to a different cell, and that's what you see in the example above. So one cell is secreting a signal and it binds to the receptor on a nearby cell. So this is known as paracrine signaling. There are some cases where the signal will be released and it'll bind to the cell that released the signal. So that is known as autocrine regulation, all right? So autocrine regulation or autocrine signaling. Some examples of local regulators that participate or that release signals to either self or to other target cells that are close by include growth factors, all right? So growth factors are chemicals that are responsible for stimulating cell division or sometimes growth of the target cell. Histamines These are stored in immune cells, and these are responsible for or are released for allergic reactions. And then you have nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a chemical mediator that's going to bind to the target cell. And this is basically a gas, and it helps the smooth muscles relax, and it causes the blood vessels to dilate. And this will result in a decrease in blood pressure. And then you have your prostaglandins. So prostaglandins are hormones that make the smooth muscles contract. All right, so this altogether is an example of, we've given specific examples of local regulators and talked about the definition of a local regulator. So you have two types of local regulators. They're paracrine and autocrine. All right, they can either be paracrine or autocrine. And again, they're going to go or diffuse. These signals that are synthesized by the cell will be released to either nearby target cells, or they're going to bind to the cell that released those chemicals. Some chemicals will need to be released, and they need to be transported by the blood to the target cell. All right. So one example would be a hormone. A hormone will basically be released. It's going to be synthesized by a cell. And remember, I brought up the example of your endocrine cells, or your endocrine glands are going to release the hormones. These are going to travel or diffuse into capillaries, and then these are transported to target cells that are located in the blood. So an example for distant transmission would be your hormones, okay? So hormones have to travel in order to get to their target cells. So they're going to travel and be transported by the blood through the target cell. Another way to sort of get your signal to where it needs to be, you have leukocytes. Your leukocytes are, or white blood cells, that's what these are. They're going to carry their signals to sites of infection. All right, so they have to make temporary cell-to-cell contacts in order to home or move to the site of damage and infection. And the way that they do that is by attaching temporarily to cell adhesion molecules on the target cell. All right, that's what this image is showing. So those cell adhesion molecules are often referred to as CAMs. And examples of these cellular adhesion molecules include your integrins and selectins. They're going to allow the cell to find the site of infection. Another way for a signal to get to the target cell is directly through cell-to-cell junctions. So in the earlier chapters, we talked about gap junctions. So gap junctions are connections, are formed through connections in the cytoplasms. These are going to join the cytoplasms of two adjacent cells. So whatever signals, these can flow freely to the cytoplasm of the adjacent cell. So this is an example of a gap junction. Gap junctions are found in animal cells, whereas with the plasmodesmata, remember, that is relevant or pertaining to a plant cell. So you're joining the cytoplasms of two adjacent plant cells. So that's another way that a signal can get to the target cell. And finally, signals can travel or get to the target cell by, what you have here is a neuron. So your neuron will relay electrical impulses. And what this will do is cause the release of neurotransmitters, okay? So that release of neurotransmitters and binding to a target neuron will cause another electrical impulse to happen in the target cell. All right. And so electrical signals is another way that a message or a signal can travel. Also, you have cells in the ear are going to receive sound waves. Cells in the eye are going to receive light waves. So those are energy signals that can be converted to electrical signals. So altogether, we have talked about, and this is just to recap, the different types of signaling molecules that are synthesized by cells. We've also talked about the mode or method of delivery, how these signaling molecules can get to the target cell.